And so it was with incredible excitement, like real, true, authentic joy, that I welcome my beloved, my dear sister and comrade. I met Dr. Savannah Shange at the age of 24. We were both starting a brand new school together in the heart of San Francisco's southeast sector. And I was just blown away by this young woman's ability to see in every direction and to create, like, just in the most beautiful way, and really lead with heart and knowing. And so Dr. Shange, I hand it over to you. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're in for an absolute treat.
Thank you so much for that. First, for that incredible acknowledgement of the space um, in which we all move and live. What do they say? The context in which all that came before us, or whatever it is. Because I think it's so important for us to not be suckered into this idea that we're just one thing. And so I do want to take a moment to appreciate everyone for setting up this incredible institute. Inviting me to be part of it, especially to you, Ariana, for your vision for these 3 days. Nikki, thank you for coordinating the logistics. Leora, for your leadership. Jerry also has got our back, so I really appreciate um, all of you. The talk I'd like to offer today is called "We Got Outsiders Up in Here: Ethnographic Research as a Tool for Critical Renewal." And so, Oriana mentioned this, but my name is Savannah Shange. I'm previously a public high school teacher. I'm now faculty at the University of California, Santa Cruz in both anthropology and critical race and ethnic studies. As far as a flow for our time together, um, the offering I have today is broken up into 3 sections. First, I'm just going to offer some framing comments about what research might have to offer to practice and the background of some of the work I'm sharing today. The second section is a little nugget of offering, which is an ethnographic story about a fight, or more so the fallout after a fight, which I'm sure many people here have moved through in their own school settings. Um, for me, this is a story that helps me think about who belongs in a school, who doesn't belong, and more importantly, who gets to decide. Finally, we'll spend the last 10 minutes or so to apply some of what emerges from this research to our own school and program context before we close out together. This last part, you'll need ideally a physical piece of paper and something to write with. Does that work out for folks? Are we okay? Do you feel okay with that for a flow? I can't see. Somebody's nodding. Leora's nodding. Okay, excellent. I see some nods out there. Um, so much of what I'm sharing today comes from my book, Progressive Dystopia, Abolition, Anti-Blackness, and Schooling in San Francisco, which is an ethnography of life at what was at one point the blackest school in the least black city in America, and one of the poorest schools in the city that has the second highest proportion of billionaires in the world. And so in it, I pay attention to the lives of students, teachers, and families to tell a broader story about race, place, and belonging in the US. And so people use this word like ethnography to mean a lot of different things and to do a lot of different things. But for me, it's just the science of storytelling, right? So I'm a social scientist. And for me, I use stories as my primary data set. We tell small stories to make big points based on the assumption that all these huge processes of poverty and racism, homo and transphobia, ableism, xenophobia, right? The same structures that Oriana was just talking to us about, they play out in the tiniest scenes of our lives, right? Racism is not gonna like drop a banner from a blimp, and neither is belonging, right? Both belonging and racism show up in the minutes of staff meetings, in side conversations you have with kids in the hallway, right? So one invitation I have for us in this space is to think about what this one story might illuminate about inclusion and exclusion within our own context and our own work. Who is centered in our school settings and who's on the outside looking in, right? How do patterns of poverty, race, and gender layer onto that belonging? And most importantly, what would it take for every child to belong? So these are all kind of different questions I take up in the book, which really revolves around this dyad between utopia on the one hand and dystopia on the other. So even in the context when people are trying to make the perfect, ideal school community, it's still crucial to look at it from the perspective of those who are left out of that perfection, right? I don't know if we have any like data nerd types out there, but if you are there, this is for you. My data corpus is set in Southeast San Francisco and spans 7 years from 2010 to 2016. It includes observer participation, interviews, focus groups, policy analysis. And with that, this is a story that starts on the top of a foggy hill in Frisco. Wait, Ricky got suspended too? Jackie asked, her voice echoing down the long hallway, a reminder that she was supposed to be in class. Her homegirl Sierra grabbed my phone to set the record straight, speaking into the voice memo app. No, he didn't even start nothing. The Mexicans started it because they were spitting on Nevaeh and calling her B words. This blatant indictment of Mexicans was incidentally accurate for Spider and Jose, who were there during the schoolyard argument with Nevaeh, but not for the more diverse crew of Central American and South American Latinx kids that assembled around them. Don't say B words, they're recording, chided Jackie, shaping herself in response to the archive, anticipating her words in circulation as they are right now in this Zoom room. Just then, Juan Carlos passed by. The hall pass dangling from his hand, he walked backwards, chanting in his Chilango-inflected sing-song, if she calls herself a bitch, then she is one, to which both spindly Black girls perched on the table popped up to protest. See? Ooh, they're so racist. Juan Carlos's hallway jaunt was interrupted by one of Robeson Justice Academy's co-founders, Aaron, who stepped in front of the teenager to guide him back to our quartet. Addressing them all, he began, so I need to explain something to all three of you, and Ms. Shange, you may want to wait, gesturing towards my ubiquitous iPhone recorder. I assented almost thoughtlessly, following Aaron and the kids into his office, but years later, it's this moment, this gesture towards the phone that haunts me the most, right? Mind you, Aaron knew at that moment that I was writing an ethnography about anti-Black racism in progressive schools, right? And he asked me to come and document the interaction to the interaction that was going to come, as if it was going to like prove what a great anti-racist he was. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The three young people and I sat in front of Aaron's desk in the principal's office. Jackie, a Black freshman whose cousin had been in the center of this kind of racialized conflagration. And for those of us who work in multiracial school settings, you may be familiar with this kind of dynamic in which there may be individual fights between students or individual, tensions and interactions that because of the context become what feels like a racial animus, right? Even if that's not what's really the nut of what's going on. This is a situation like that. So you have Jackie, this Black freshman whose cousin was at the center of the fight, her young roadie Sierra, and this sophomore Juan Carlos, whose friend had also been in the fight. So in some ways, it's like any other conflict mediation where each side speaks on their experience and tries to come to a space of overlapping responsibility and accountability. I'm sure many of us have led young people through that process, right? Happening at the same time, though, there was a challenge to the entire project of Robeson, issued chiefly by Jackie. In the tumble of words and feelings that were the next hour, Jackie and Sierra pummeled their principal, Aaron, with questions while he tried to use the fight and subsequent gossiping on social media as teachable moments. So he's trying to talk about the fight the day before, and Aaron laid out his political prescription, shifting jerkily into Black English grammar to make his point. The thing is, y'all could be like, it's not worth getting pissed about, it's whatever. You could apologize if you disrespected someone. You could realize you have more in common than in terms of differences and move with our school's rich values. Or you could take it to be a racial thing. Like those Latin boys are disrespecting me and those Black girls are disrespecting me. And before you know it, you have the prison culture. You have people acting all in the streets yesterday in a way that's going to get them locked up. That's exactly what the people in power want. So I had no choice but to call SFPD. We got outsiders up in here. So here, Aaron discursively distances himself from structural power by deftly shifting responsibility for incarceration onto young Frisco while he evades responsibility for being the one who actually called the precinct. He had no choice, but apparently these children had nothing but choices and made the wrong ones. Ironically, he deploys the rich acronym of the institutional credo, which is respect, integrity, courage, and humility, to dismiss young people's perceptions of disrespect, though we'll soon see that he takes it very seriously when he himself feels disrespected. Beyond this kind of political pretzel logic, the pivotal move in Aaron's speech is the invocation of China, Tyrell, and the rest of the Black kids who gathered for the fight as outsiders. In part, this apparent racial imbalance in the fight was a trick of post industrial geography. The 3% of Frisco that is still Black lives almost uniformly in public housing, most of which is painfully isolated from the rest of the city and takes forever to get to on public transportation. It takes forever to get to there from anywhere else except from Robeson, which is located on purpose in the southeast to be closer to the community. It's right over the hill from the swamp, which is slang for SF's last large remaining housing project, which is kind of racially marked as Black and Samoan. The closest plurality Latinx neighborhood was the Mission District, flanked by the Black and Latinx Potrero Hill and Armour Street projects. So even if Juan Carlos had Cardenales on the way, they would probably had to hop on the bus and take it all the way to the school instead of just book it up the hill. So just as China had been asked to leave Robeson because of her behavior, Tyrell, the other kid who jumped in the fight, had also once attended the school, but had been recommended for transfer out of Robeson by Aaron. Another one of the boys who came up from the swamp to fight was the eldest brother of a set of triplets at Robeson, each one of whom would eventually be kicked out of Robeson one by Aaron. For anyone familiar with the school to prison pipeline, this pattern of removing Black students from schools is par for the course in US education, right? Raise your hand or drop it in the chat if this is something that you see in your own school context, right? This kind of cycle of kids being asked to leave over and over again. Okay, a couple folks see that. And so in this context, we have Aaron presenting outsider as this category that invites incarceration, but these children he's calling outsiders once called him Mr. Ross, and now he's calling the police on them. So hearing that he called the police, Jackie asked, somebody went to jail? No, because SFPD is so incompetent, they didn't get here soon enough. I wish they had. You want somebody to go to jail? Exactly. So if the SF, whatever they're called, the police came up in here and took them boys to jail, you would let them? Jackie here is trying to give Aaron the benefit of the doubt. She's giving him a chance to walk back his seat. What does he say? The ones who don't go here, yes, not my own students. The protected status he gives to his own students points to how the notion of ownership still structures his practice of community solidarity. Aaron continues, I don't have time for outsiders. If they're gonna, I don't give a crap about them. If they're gonna come up in here and mess with our students, then I'm gonna have the SFPD come up here and throw them on the ground, knock their heads, yes. I went back to the tape twice just to make sure I heard it right. And not only did he say knock their heads, he says it twice. His flippantness summons colonial white masculinity's fetish of gratuitous anti-Black violence, rooted in Reconstruction logics and still bearing fruit. The disposability of China, Tyrell, and them as Black outsiders is an example of the kind of exclusionary logic that's become common sense, even for educators who are invested in equity. Jackie and Sierra shadowbox with Aaron for half an hour, centering a gendered analysis of why his disciplinary choices were wrong. Nevaeh was spat on, she was called a bitch, and that mattered to them. Arguing that it was necessary to call for help when the fight started, Jackie reasoned, they said they were going to bring people up here too. I mean, a boy was trying to fight a girl. Come on now, she's going to grab her cousin on them, and I don't think that he should go to jail for that. For Jackie, the sanctity of Black girls' flesh, the little bit of solidarity that Black girls can get is an honorable cause, not a reason to get your head knocked in by police. And in fact, the same police department has committed more fatal shootings in the past 10 years than any other department in that region, right? Meanwhile, Juan Carlos piped in to justify the threat of jumping Nevaeh. Excuse me, but what did she do before the fight? They spat on Nevaeh. What did she do? They spat on Nevaeh. She threw some hot sauce. Oh, well, he was talking hella shit, and that's a whole ass girl. They was trying to fight her. She threw hot sauce. Oh, well, like boys trying to fight a girl? Come on. Aaron stepped in to validate Juan Carlos's point, and Jackie was not having it. But Sierra, no. Listen to Juan Carlos. Why do you keep letting him talk instead of me? Because he's saying reasonable stuff instead of interrupting me. Okay, wow. I don't care. I don't care. Anticipating Beyonce's homage to hot sauce as a Black girl weapon of war, Nevaeh refused to be called out of her name. And Jackie, in turn, refuses to cede to Aaron's performance of democracy that doesn't take Black lives seriously. Juan Carlos is saying reasonable stuff, but it was actually his dehumanization of Black girls in the hallway. If she calls herself a bitch, then she is one, that sparked the meeting in the principal's office in the first place. When Aaron calls reasonable stuff, is less about the content of Juan Carlos's comments and more about the form that they're taking, right? He waits his turn to talk shit, defers to the white man in charge before he tells Sierra, nobody cares about you, so why are you always on my nuts? Reasonable is a rhythm. It's a stooped habitus of deference, however feigned. Reasonable is the police knocking Black heads on gray concrete. It's leaving homegirls undefended and never interrupting me. Aaron sounds real reasonable when he explains to Jackie why she should be quiet and listen. I spend a lot of time listening to you, and we as a school spend a lot of time trying to help you and support you. If you don't feel that way, then that's your business. Then you have an inaccurate perception of how the world is treating you. So if you have an inaccurate perception of how the world is treating you, you're going to react in negative ways. I'm not saying we're perfect. I'm saying I treat you with a lot of respect. You've disrespected me in a lot of ways. Jackie responds with the same question I have. Do you hear yourself? How I disrespect you? So I don't take it personal, but you're not always on point yourself in terms of how you especially treat adults. So don't be complaining that we don't let you talk. You don't. We don't always have to let you talk. It ain't always about you. But ain't it though? If it's not about her, then who? What are the stakes? Why are we doing this work and for whom? So I want to pause here. And as a way of encountering these questions, I want to take a moment to map out our own contexts. So in a minute, I'm going to play a 4-minute instrumental song. And while it plays, just as a digestion method, um, I invite you to draw two, so if you can see me, two concentric circles on a piece of paper. And once you have your paper set up, you'll write, think of one young person who is well loved by peers and adults in your workplace. It doesn't have to be the top student, this and that, but just somebody who like is near and dear, right? Even if they're a total pain in the fucking ass, they're still near and dear, right? So put that kid's name in the center. And then outside, so that kid's name goes here. Outside the outermost circle, somewhere out here, write the name of at least one person who's thought of as a problem or thought of as an outlier, right? You might want to include students who may have been asked to leave your program, right? Who used to be there, or who have been lost, right, to street violence or other kinds of violence. And then next, I want you to place yourself somewhere. And when you place yourself, go ahead and write a me with a box around it, right? Because some of us, we do this work and we were co-founders of the program, right? We might be really right at the center. We might just be starting our first school year, right? So think about where do you fit in that? And then as we keep going, keep populating your belonging map with kind of 8 to 10 more youth and staff. Who's at the center? Who's at the periphery? Well, if you're still mapping, that's totally fine. Here's a couple of free write questions. How does your position on the map shape the work you're able to do? Right? What connections, if any, do you see between the folks in the center circle and in the outer circle? And then finally, what kind of relationships do you personally have to folks in each circle, the center, the in between, and the outside? What are a couple ideas you have about what you'd like to deepen that? That's just some free write to go deeper. If you're still mapping, it's totally fine. Well, first, let's see. Let's see our maps for a moment. We're just gonna have a little community share as we're looking at them. So part of what I was really thinking about today was how do these patterns of race and gender, and in particular in this school setting, also neighborhood, really factor into belonging. So after you have your map, go ahead and take a look and see if you see any patterns in terms of how race and gender, neighborhood, depending on your school setting, maybe country of origin, ability, sports team, right? What patterns do you see there? To kind of make a couple notations, maybe underline or star next to kids who share a certain identity or a certain role in the school community. In terms of your free writes, I would love to know how are folks position? I would love to know kind of whether you were positioned more in um, the center, more in the middle, more on the outside. I was actually mapping my current work setting at UC Santa Cruz, and I really think I'm kind of middle to the outside. What about you all? We're hearing that families, often there's like a political element, and actually family relationship. Interesting, neurotypicality being one of these kind of patterns in which neurotypical kids end up in the center, and both kids who are neurodiverse, right, and or who are people of color, who may be disabled, end up on the outsides, right?
So, can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. So as I was doing it, I was noticing like, because you had kind of framed it, and I'm sorry if I wasn't listening to the prompt well enough, but like if you had framed it like kind of like the center of the school, and I was thinking like in terms of like how the school kind of sees it, right? Or like we're in the power of the school. Um, and but as I was drawing it out and placing kids, I realized that like if kids were like from their perception,
Mm,
who is at the center of their school experience, who holds sway or connection, or are they drawn to, like the center of gravity would shift sometimes. Like the kids that were in the center were often kids of the map as I was drawing it to start, were often kids that probably most of the kids would feel gravitational pull towards, but there were also a lot of kids off to one kind of area of the map that maybe school officials wouldn't put as
mhm,
like
mhm, mhm.
key players, are the more like ones that people get irritated by or they get frustrated with. But like a lot of kids have a lot of respect for those kids, you know. And then there were some
Yeah,
that sadly like didn't fit either, right? They didn't fit the ones that the adults enjoyed or respected, and they didn't fit the ones the other kids enjoyed or necessarily even respected. So it just made me think about kind of how the center of gravity of the map changes depending on who who was perspective, I guess I would take.
exactly. And do you mind if I share your name?
No, Kelly is my name.
Kelly, what you bring up, I think, is really important in two ways. One is like perspective, right? So who gets to decide who belongs and who doesn't, but also these different kinds of relationships we see between the different circles, right? Within the school perspective, maybe like, oh, these are the good kids and these are the like problem kids. But looking at one another, they may just see each other as kids, as friends, right? And so I think that's what I really want us to think about in terms of relationship building, as opposed to having it be a hierarchy between the inside and the outside. What does it look like to be building bonds that go across, that can actually leverage those same connections that Kelly just brought up in terms of, okay, some of these kids on the outside are actually really good friends with kids on the inside. A lot of kids throughout the school actually look up to and really draw a lot of kind of like joy and strength from these kids that are on the outside, right? So what would it mean to leverage those kinds of connections to bring not only bring students from the outside in, but also to widen this inner circle, to widen these circles so that there's more belonging. So there's actually nobody left outside, right? What does it mean to widen that out? And one exercise that I was lucky enough to participate in, I think Oriana might have been there, was actually led by a visionary school leader and kind of school thinker, Kate Goka Lee. Somebody had a school of 250 people. You can do this in a school like that. This person printed out a master list of every single kid in the school in like a huge point font, maybe 20-point font, and taped it all around the big library for the big staff meeting, right? And I think you can do this even in a school up to 1,000 if you have enough time. Literally print out every kid's name. And each teacher went around and put a star next to every kid they felt like they had a genuine relationship with, right? Every single kid, just literally read through the list. Oh yeah, I know this. I connected to this kid. I'm connected to this kid. So after an hour of spending time with every person, thinking about every kid in the school building, we really saw the incredible um, imbalance. Because some kids had literally 15 stars next to them, right? And some of those kids were a total pain in the ass, right? But even through their pain in the assness is also where they were able to build those relationships and those bonds. So people are like, oh, they may be annoying, but they're totally indispensable. Those kids were really clearly at the center. There was a bunch of kids who had 1 star, 2 star, or none, right? That no one had really had a relationship with. Kids who had been there for 2 years, and not a single adult in the building had a strong relationship with that kid. Those are the kids who may not have ever gotten in trouble, not have any disciplinary record, but they're most at risk for lack of belonging. They're most at risk um, for not being able to be held and cared for, right? And so then the next step was making a plan for how can we actually build those connections and make targeted ways of building relationship with those kids that aren't organized around discipline. Oriana, are you coming off of mute because it's time for me to wrap up?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So the last thing I did want to share, um, in addition to my deep appreciation for you all. Oh, right, I have some more things to say. I wrote things down. Um, I did want to end thinking about relationships because it's really with relationships that we can plant the seeds of renewal for our schools, right? We love policy changes. We love, one-to-one interventions and programs. But at the heart of social resilience is social connectivity, right? For me, a North Star in this work is Mariam Kaba. So I want to really thank Kelly for bringing her up earlier. Um, and she's this incredible abolitionist author and practitioner who says that everything worth doing is done with other people, right? Um, and I think I want to offer a few resources that are really useful for me in terms of nurturing, renewal, and repair. And the first is her book, "We Do This Till We Free Us," right here, which is this kind of bird's eye view of what abolition, right? And all abolition means is care-centered repair, right? What does that look like across different scales? Mia Birdsong's book, "How We Show Up," looks particularly at what it takes to really improve the quality of our relationships, not just building them, right? But improving their quality, whether it's at work with our clients and kids or at home with our family and friends. Finally, Adrienne Marie Brown's book, "Holding Change," is a really very usable kind of how-to book that's written literally for the people gathered in this Zoom, right? It's written for facilitators, for community workers, for transformative leaders, and it has perspectives from different movements and different kinds of folks, giving, using essays and examples of what it really means to shepherd a process of healing while still holding yourself with the tenderness and compassion that you deserve. So I want to thank you for doing that today, for spending time with me and with these stories, and for holding Sierra, for holding Jackie, and for Juan Carlos, and even holding Aaron with critical love. I really appreciate it, and I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.